There we go. Art critique time. So today I want to do it for a map because we did it for our weapon yesterday, the charging targe. So I'm thinking a King of the Hill map, koth map. Can you guess which one? Can you guess which one? It's on the list of names right now. No. It's the first one. Badlands. Let's go to Badlands. As always, disclaimers. This isn't properly a discussion about game design. I bump a bit into it, but this is more about the visuals. And also the method, the way I'm doing the critique is through Feldman's method, which is about 4 steps in order: description, analysis, interpretation, and judgment. On the description, I describe what I see. On the analysis, I look into the elements of art. On the interpretation, I'm gonna interpret the creative vision behind the art. And on the judgment step, I'm gonna call this successful or unsuccessful art, basing myself on the principles of art for this artwork. So, and comparing that to the vision. So with all that said, let us begin. I always want to have this build just to have the power jack. There you go. Okay, so let's begin. Description. What do I see? Well, first things first are some sort of complex. We have the classic locker with ammo and health, medical supplies, let's say. The workstations, computers, buttons, screens. This one has a phone, a tray with a bunch of minutiae. Like, what are these? Some machines, maybe? I don't know. Whatever. There's some papers. Billboard, what else? It looks like this whole place is built out of concrete or something. There are lights and stuff. What else is there for me to describe? Air vents. We can go forward. Let's go right here. We can look. We can see this was built on some sort of mountain, maybe. This is like stone. We have like these open lockers, the bench, the exit with some kind of shutter door, and a bunch of buildings as you can see. And the ground, it looks like we're in some sort of maybe desert with the rocks also, right? But I just want to look over here first. There is this pile of crates over here, also a bunch of them. There is this thing. There's this wooden platform. I saw the specific name of this the other day, but now I forget. I'm gonna have to recap that later someday. Also some sort of metal sheet, and this is here is another exit going down this set of stairs, another garage door, shutter door, with a fence with barbed wire, and over there's like some sort of lake here. We all know there's like water down here. There's some sort of bridge. There's the pickup. I'll be considering the pickups part of the map. I could not, but I will. What else? You can see the sky is a shade of blue, I guess, a bit reddish purplish, but in any way. What else? And also there's this whole set of buildings, right, made out of wood and metal plates and stuff. Some sort of a makeshift structure, or I don't know. That's what the feeling I get from the metal plates and the way they were arranged. What else? Rio Grande, Coco, classic company here. Also this is fenced off because, right, I could also critique this map for 5CP, right? And then there will be some differences. Well, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know if I would do 2 critiques. Let's just stick with this one. Oh man, because if I do it for 5CP, I would have to see the differences. I believe 5CP is bigger. There is more room on the map. I don't know now. Either way, let's just continue. What else? Anyway, behind this fence there is like this mountain thing with a part on top that's used in the 5CP version of the map. What else? Some vegetation, barrel, big arrow sign pointing to the right. What's this? Restricted area, authorized personnel only. Okay. Some fences, battlements, hose, beacon, maintenance, shipping, receiving, a bunch of signs and warnings. Keep this doorway clear. As always, searching for tissue maps. Also an advertisement. Industrial, trust the best. You know I always do. Wooden planks, tires, what else for me to describe? Another sign. Now here I like inside the structure, and over here not much different. There is a set of windows here that allows us to see over there in the bridge viaduct thing. What else? Also you can see some plateaus, I think, in the distance. And here we can kind of make out that this is indeed some sort of desert. It's not just the ground over there, not just your stuff. And yeah, here we have this sort of viaduct thing with some wagons. Not exactly wagons, but it feels like a train cart things used to carry cargo. Some boxes also. This one is radioactive, caution, radioactive material. I don't think wood is enough to make it safe, but okay. Keep this doorway clear. This is another shutterable door, but this one is closed. A bunch of barrels on this train cart. You can see on the distance that this is in the middle of a train line. Very interesting. Xing, I don't know. Radioactive, Xing, probably Xing, right? Caution, no trespassing. So, and in here, that most things are the same. Also, a bunch of the barrels here are yellow, I suppose. The other ones they are blue, although they are still radioactive. They're different advertisements, but in any case, right? ZP Plow, Alliance, Red Valley Mining. And down here under the viaduct, it's what we have to pick up a. It would be a medium health pack and looks kind of some sort of a lunchbox, but there are probably bandages and stuff inside, right? If I were to guess. Vegetation. So there's a number. There are some rocks here on this valley part. And what else? And now I think I think there's one last thing for me to mention. Here, there is this like balcony that allows us to look at the middle of the bridge, the viaduct, and the control point. And now we're just gonna look at the red. That's it for the blue side, right? But let's just see if we can find any meaningful difference for the red side of the map. Red Valley Mining, exit control point. It's probably just gonna be minor differences, but sometimes visually there are some bigger ones. That's interesting to think about. Did you ever notice that the barrels here are all yellow, but the ones on the other side are blue? I hadn't before this critique, so there's stuff like that. Then let's see. I guess it's worth mentioning that back there on the blue side, the structures were all like made with metal plates, right? Is here on the red side, they are all made out of wood. Looks like both parts, right? The bottom one are made out of wood, also on the other one, but still. Keep out. I also suppose I could have looked at the base through another angle back there, but anyway. Also, I guess there are some metal plates here, even though they are kind of either rusty or painted red. One of those. Happy Farmers Cooperative. Trust the best. Okay, so they're still each other's catchphrases, I guess. Maintenance, shipping and receiving, putting colors of red, you know. Yeah, so now the only thing left, I think, is to see how. I forgot to look inside the river, the pond. but it's mostly the same. And here, would you look at that? Things are mostly the same, right? I guess the computer stations are in red instead of blue on their details. But open lockers, I guess the color of the clothes are in red now. What else? The signs, we saw some before, but the signs are also red now. This support thing to help carry crates around. There is meat over there. And yeah, so I think that's it for the description. Everything else is that I didn't mention is basically the same in general from both sides. I guess there is like a chimney over there, I just realized, and some lights here, but whatever. Let's move on to the analysis. So for the analysis, I'm gonna be looking into 8 elements of art. Most sources believe in 7, but I'm like some authors, I'm adding points to it, so I'm gonna be considering points, lines, shapes, forms, space, texture, color, and value, and we might as well begin with points. So let's see if we can find any points. So for example, stuff here on the wall, we could kind of make out that there are like some points here, but we could also refer to them as the textures of it. In this case, I think I'm gonna go for the texture. I think it's easier. But you know, kind of a little bit of both in a way. What else? What else? Points. It's very easy for you to use points in art to help convey textures. Something like that you could say for the floor if you think about that. There's like some white points on the floor, but again, I believe they're more like textures this time, more like paint that was dripped on the floor or something. And here it's like, if I'm gonna talk about this again on textures, but this here is like a damaged part of the wall, and so there are like some points, some imperfections on it. What else? Similar logic here. In here, if we look at these things, they're not exactly points, right? And if I am going to talk about them, probably on the forms I would, even though they're not like the most noticeable forms here, I would say. So since this is 3D and a lot of stuff has like detailed textures, not sure if we're gonna be able to find a point without that side to it. Let's see, like everything on Team Fortress 2, not everything, but many things on Team Fortress 2 have textures. Here again, like at this point, I think it's easier to look at it as a texture of the wood. It could even be of the forms of it. I just think it's easier just than just call it points. Again, on the arrow here, like it's more some dribbles of paint or some points without it. That would be, could you call it space? Not exactly space, but not points either, I would say, because then it's where there is lack of paint. So I gotta be careful with the semantics that we choose here. Let's just look, see if we can find something. An example of something that would be a point without relating to texture is something like, can I find it? Sometimes there is some warning signs with a little more of a very stark design. Then we could argue about points. Also, if it's depending on the technique used, if this was like pointillism used somehow. Also there's a camera here. Then everything would be points. So we will talk about that. But the important part is always to talk about where there are points to me, and I also like to mention their colors. Even though technically color is another element, but I think sometimes it doesn't make sense to talk about every single color, every single detail. So that's what I do sometimes. I just mention the colors of the points on the points. Even though I could also do it for color, but you know. What else? Yeah, okay. I think in general everything that I would see for points are easier to just talk about as in terms of usually textures and maybe forms sometime. Here again, are there like points on the ground? They're more like This is more like the sand texture, right? From the effects of the art, from the work of the artist. That's how I look at it. This is also textures, for example, but there is no points here, I believe. But anyway, let's move on to lines. Lines, 1442 something similar. 1442 specifically because, for example, this part here of the wall, there is like a division between the left and the right part. I don't see any lines here, but there are some 3D aesthetics for games even that do that kind of choice. For example, games from the Telltale company or from the Borderlands game series, they have like on edges of their 3D models, a number of times there are lines there, even thick ones. Also, if we want another example, the Ultimate Spider-Man games have a little bit of that. But anyway, so 1442 is usually not that's usually not the case. And so if you look at stuff like this on the walls, I'm gonna again do the logic that I use for points. In this case, this kind of lines on the wall, I think they convey better either the texture again, but I'm not sure if either the texture or the forms again. If it's a texture, it's like a pattern texture, I would say, because it's like a sequence of lines, you know, of delimited lines. Kind of a very long, big pattern instead of like checkers or something, but still, maybe that's one way I believe that's one way to describe it. What else? Here, technically, you could see some lines in here, but this one's an easy. This one's texture easily. This would be a sedimentary texture maybe, because this like layer like appearance is what you get when sedimentary rocks form over I don't even know if centuries or thousands of years or whatever, a long time. But anyway, I believe it makes way more sense to call them those textures. So enough of that boring stuff. Can we actually find one line here? Again, let's do what we did for points. Again, here like you don't see anything to separate the white of the arrow from the red around it. There could be a line there doing that, but I don't see it. What else? Here on the wood, on the planks. I think it's easier to talk about, to look at it as the element of space, like very tight gaps. What else? Different critics could look at this differently, mind you. More tight gaps. I don't think we're gonna find exceptions. This here, this one feels a. Let me look at a different angle. This one feels a bit like there is a line, but I think it's actually just a very thin shadow, I believe here, which is something that happens sometimes. Sometimes we see that on boxes. It's like there's something that looks a bit like a line, but to me, it's usually they're a bit thicker. Not thicker. They have like a very. Do I see anyone? Oh, okay. Maybe on another box. But yeah, like when looking closely at them, it's often looks like there is a very subtle gradient there, and I believe it's more about shadows. I don't know. I thought there was gonna be a box here. Am I on the blue thing side? Yeah. I just wanted to showcase a box here. Just tell what I'm talking about. Lines, again, this one's is textures. I believe it makes more sense to look at them as textures. Maybe these boxes are gonna do it. Okay, yeah, this is the example. Like this line here is looks kind of a black line, but has some sort of gradient. As I see it, it's more like a very thin shadow. But anyway, with that said, yeah, I don't think this map has. I don't see maps on this map. I don't see lines on this map. Classic still 1442, but it's very important to always look for exceptions and to do this properly. At least that's how I like to do it. So let's go for shapes. Shapes, they're gonna definitely be here. A number of. By the way, just for you to be mindful, shapes are, when it comes to art, shapes are always two-dimensional. Forms are always three-dimensional. You know, we kind of use those names, those words interchangeably in day-to-day life, but in art, that's the difference here. For this critique specifically, especially. So for shapes, you could talk about like this, for example, a rectangular shape here for the locker. Although since this is 3D, depending on the angle, we're gonna have different shapes. So if we look at the locker through this angle, it becomes a hexagon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shapes. So that's the idea. More squares and hexagons and rectangles for this bunch of boxes here. Some you have these unique shapes for the lights, I guess. Through this downward angle, it's a bit circular, not perfect circles, but still circular and oval shapes. A bunch of unique shapes for the many details here. Nothing too easy to just slap a word to describe it all. But a number of them are team for the clothes, I guess. What else? Team, elongated shape for the bench. Let's go outside, right? We might find more interesting shapes there. So here we see the buildings, which have what we would call trapezoidal shapes, I believe. When it's like kind of a rectangle, but with a diagonal edge at the top part, let's say. So a lot of trapezoidal shapes. Here the arrow has like an arrow shape, I guess. What else? For the plateaus at the far distance, something kind of unique. I'm not sure it looks a bit rectangular, but they are, I think, curved enough to differentiate. Rectangular shapes. Okay, this one is kind of stuck, so not like rectangle. This would be kind of an oblong shape, I guess, for the barrel. And again, circular depending on the angle. What else? Very unique shapes for this small mound here. For the pickup, for example, this small one, it's kind of a bottle shape, right? The base, and there's the cap and stuff. Through many angles of it, depending on how it looks, sometimes it's gonna be a circular shape, but a bit harder. Unique, very detailed shapes for the vegetation, again rectangular here. What else? We have a number of details with more unique shapes, like this. It's kind of a balcony here, right? What else? Also something like that for the lights again. This thing here has it's a unique shape of its own. It kinda looks a bit like a triangle at one part, but then there's the base on the top of it, so I don't know, I'm gonna just say unique shape of its own. So this barrel looks a bit more rectangular-ish on this shape, depending on the angle that you look. This one probably better. Depending on the angle, a bit oblongo shape. Okay, this one has this cut-off part, but usually barrels have like rectangular, circulars, and oblong shapes, depending on the angles. This one maybe we're gonna be able to showcase it easily. Let's see. Maybe not. Not easily, but I might be able to showcase it. So, like this barrel here that I'm looking through this angle, it's an oblong shape. Basically, this is an oblong. You know, it's kind of a rectangle with smoothed out edges, stuff like that. Anyway, here we see unique shapes for the cart, more hexagons, squares and rectangles for the boxes. There's this pizza here, triangle shape, which becomes I believe a trapezoidal shape, depending on the angle that you look at it. Something like that, I guess. What else? We have these rocks here, with some sort of protruding shape from the ground, and with with this kind of cut off parts on the top of it for their shapes. Guess that's it. What else? Similar stuff for other rocks that we see. Under the viaduct slash bridge, we see the support beams with like rectangular shapes. What else? This fence here, chain link fence, it's kind of the shape of a mesh, let's say, right? Mesh, grid, stuff like that. I'm not sure if there's anything else for me to analyze for the shapes here. Just a lot of like geometrical stuff and a number of more unique ones. Sometimes on details we have this like ring shape for the holes here, I guess. But a lot of geometrical shapes, as I mentioned, as I repeated, many rectangles, squares, hexagons. Also circles and oblongs. And just to recap, so the difference from that, the more unique shapes are from the... also I mentioned trapezoidal. The more unique ones are the rocks, have more unique shapes, not exactly geometrical, the train cards. And I remember something else. I guess the vegetation with a very detailed shape. Detail and... I'm not sure I would say theme for the shapes. For the shapes I guess not. Like maybe I could say that for the farms, but for the shapes they kinda make like a bush, you know, so don't think I should call them theme. And there was something else that I mentioned should be unique in shape. I don't think I remember. There's also the mesh one for the grid. I think it was the rocks, but in the distance, right, when I was talking about it looks a bit rectangular, but consider it different enough. Yeah, maybe... Yeah, I guess it was the rocks. The rocks on the far distance and these protruding rocks. I think that's it. So let's move on to farms now. Farms, which is, as I said, is about three-dimensionality. Am I on the blue? Yeah, okay. Also, BLU, blue. So farm is about three-dimensionality. Let's see what we have here. So for example, we see a lot of these slopes on many parts of the ground here. Then what else? For the structures, we see a lot of flat farms here. And if you look at the top parts of it, what would be before trapezoidal shapes become prismatic farms. This would be prisms. What else? The tires have their own farms, kinda ring-like, but you know. Cylindrical for the barrels, thin and a bit flat for the planks. What else? I wanted to get inside the spawn. So we have like this blocky farm for the lockers. Although this one is kind of a concave block, if there's open locker one, but anyway. Kind of a unique farm for the stations. Not sure I should call this, don't think I should call this like a block. What else? The tray, kind of something like that. Also blocks, blocky shapes for the crates. And also this thing here, which I don't know the name of. What else? A lot of flatness all around on the walls here, also in general. The exception of this part is a little bit more curved on the walls, on the rocky walls, curved, and I was going to say something, but it's about texture, not forms. Also, I mentioned it before, right? I might as well mention. So the bench has like a flat form, and there's a very subtle elevation, as I think I see it, for the metal parts connecting it to the underneath part. The legs of the bench. What else for forms? I already mentioned cylindrical for the barrels. Vegetation. So again, very flat on their forms, but and detailed. No, I mean, you gotta be careful to differentiate what's conveyed and the medium in which it's conveyed. because I'm gonna get a good example here, not sure. Because what we are looking at is what's being conveyed. So, for example, if there is a texture here on the wall, even if the wall is perfectly flat for the game design, for us, you know, if there is, if the collision box is completely flat, what matters to us is if the visual part of it has some sublevations or whatever, you know. So, and that means is that for the vegetation, for the forms of it, yeah, I'm just gonna stick with like very minute, very intricate, detailed, and yeah, okay, as I will say, flat also this time. Their staircase has this, you know, series of flat steps for their forms naturally. Flatness for the many platforms, the ground, the walls, the ceiling, you know, easy to expect that kind of stuff. What else? I guess we have like this many support beams, so it's not perfectly flat, but still. For the cart and the boxes have blocky forms again. The train carts here have very unique forms. It has like this flat part on top, but after that it's filled with many details for the forms. Already mentioned the barrels, already mentioned the buildings. I haven't mentioned this part here, this kind of arm that goes up and down, right? It has like a very thin, also shape, but very thin form, and tall, elongated though. I guess it's like it's a set of very small cylinders. What else? Also, okay, now things get a little bit interesting because let's talk about this for textures. I was going to talk about the this kind of wave in appearance, but that's probably a better deal if I talk about textures. And I think that's it, right, for forms in general. A lot of flatness around. The rocks, I forgot about the rocks, I guess. I talked about the slopes, but didn't talk about the rocks. So for the rocks, they have again some sort of protruding forms to them, and kind of like skewed up cylinders on a number of them, right? But then on some they get a bit thicker, so not sure if there's something that I could say other than just protruding again from the ground. The canyons over there have the plateaus, sorry, not canyons, the plateaus. Again, are like protruding and curvy, I guess. Curvy on their sides and flat on the top. Maybe I could say that for the forms. I guess that's it. Oh wow! This is kind of a unique part of this scenario. I didn't talk about it. For the forms, it has like a cylindrical top and then this not a tube, but like kind of a elongated flat block thing. It's like a duct or something, right? I don't know. Maybe smoke comes out of it. But anyway, yeah. If I was talking about it for the shapes, by the way, it's nothing too different. It has some unique ones, but a bit oblong on the upper part and hexagonal on the other one, or rectangular, either way. But just to finish the forms, just to recap, so prismatic for the buildings, a lot of blocks and cylinders, and a lot of flatness in many parts of it, and like protruding forms with a lot of curvature on the rocks and flat tops. Not sure if I missed anything important here. And mostly that. For example, the lights have this like concave form to them. I guess I could add that, even though they're a bit smaller on the overall picture. I'm not gonna mention every single thing here, by the way. But yeah. So now let's move on to space, and then we're gonna get to texture because I mentioned a lot of texture today before getting to it. So for the element of space, so like kind of vast here. Let's just saying that already, although it gets a bit tighter on this part here and then underneath. not that tight, but still, because even tighter than that is between each step, you know, there's a very tight space for it. And a lot of vastness in general, more tightness on a lot of these parts here. What else? Here on the spawn, generals, very somewhat open space here. Tight, yeah, it's always gonna be like that, right? Tight on the details, vast in general. Here, like between those parts, tight use of space. It's gonna be mostly that. So a lot of open spaces and a lot of open spaces, tightness on details, stuff like, whoops, between those tires, there's like this tight gap here. And what else? I suppose like there's, for example, these corridors which are a bit tighter. Let's call this, I don't know, moderate use of space here. So a lot of, very open, for example, here on this part of the map, the middle of it. Then inside the buildings, it's gonna be usually a more moderate use of space. Although, like, to me visually, it's still considerable. But you know, if you compare that to tightness of, say, between these two pipes, this is a lot of space if you compare those, right? But let's just call this a moderate use of space. More open here on these parts, and then finally, I believe if we look at the distance through fences, we're gonna get something vast, way vast, expansive, and so on and so forth. Also something like that for the sky, I guess we could say. So yeah, there's a little bit of, there's a wide array of spaces, right? But the important part is where we saw it. So just to recap, vast on the distance and the sky, open on the parts of that we see the ground of the desert and stuff like that. Then it gets moderate inside the buildings, and then tighter for many details. Now let's finally get into the element of texture, which is all about the surfaces, the appearances of surfaces of materials. So as I said before, this has like a damage texture, and perhaps a little bit, I don't know if it's paint on some parts of it. And we could also talk about like this part here, as I see, we could kind of call it a pattern texture, I believe. You know, what else? Don't think we see. There's a lot of minute forms, but I don't see necessarily in the texture here, interestingly. For the ground also, it's kind of like they're dirty textures or like splattered textures with paint, like on this white part, I would guess. As I said before, some kind of a layered sedimentary, let's say, texture. Not sure if you should call this sedimentary because I'm kind of taking a little bit of geology knowledge here, but anyway. What else? Again, some sort of damage and texture, and some paint scraped off for this part here. What else? For the shutter door, I don't think I'm gonna be able to see that easily. Maybe on. Okay, let's see. There's not that much texture on the shutter door. Some like a bit dented parts on the edges, I guess, but that's it. Here you can call this a woody texture, or similar to what we would expect from wood, the way the patterns of it are displayed, I would say. Also some imperfections. Alright, I forgot to talk about the gaps, right? But this would be like one of the tight spaces for the details that I mentioned before. Anyway, what else? The texture, we have like this very sand-like granulated texture for the ground, on many parts of it, even on the top of rocks. What else? On the barrels we have some sort of rust texture, something like that. And maybe a little bit of a dented one sometimes. On the tires it's a bit of a dusty texture, and perhaps a faded, we could say, texture. What else? More. Here we have again the paint. Some Yeah, it's like some paint that was applied, but it's scraped off on some parts of it, stuff like that. Also something that we see on this warning, I guess. What else for textures? Again with that. Again. Here on this train tracks, we see underneath what would be like a lot of gravel. The gravel itself, I believe we should look at it as farms. Didn't say it before, but I guess for the farms it's very like pebble-like farms, you know, for the gravel. I guess we could. This is some kind of a unique texture. Again, some sort of pattern texture, which with a. There's probably a specific name for this, but with like a metal-like quality to it. This is like a rocky texture, I would say, with some fragmented parts of it. Maybe I could have mentioned a rocky texture for the concrete back there, I don't know. Anything else? Let's see, I already mentioned the layered texture, sedimentary stuff. Here, this is what I wanted to say before. So this, now we have like this very wavy surface of the metal plates, texture easily. It's wavy and also a little bit scraped off on a number of parts, the paint on it, apparently. Yeah. What else? What about the vegetation? There's not much texture on the vegetation, sadly. There's just more color here, I would say. I'll say. What else? I think that's mostly it for textures, considering the building and stuff. Again, for this bridge, kind of rocky, fragmented, and cracked texture, again, sand-like on the ground. For the water, it has some sort of a translucent texture to it, I would say. Or could they say water texture? Maybe. I would have to revise that. But yeah. For the lights, are there anything meaningful? Not that much. Perhaps we have something here on the edges of it. It looks like a little bit of a, not opaque, sorry, a little bit of a distorted texture, I would say. I don't know. I'm not sure if that distorted is the word I wanted here, but whatever, let's stick to it. Yeah, okay, I think that's it for texture. I think I have described a lot of it already. Again, scrape it off, damaged stone stuff. For the shutters, just out of curiosity, yeah, I do think, again, I see a little bit of a bent texture on parts of it. So let's move on to the element of color now. First things first, let's talk about the rocks. Which have these very distinct shades of orange. There's a number of different shades of orange there, and that kinda is repeated on the ground, of the desert. So that's notable and present on a lot of the map. Also, besides that, we have shades of grey for the many metal parts here. We have blue for the zero sign. Blue painted here. Also, here's, I believe, a shade of white for this concrete part. This one maybe a grey. I don't know, they're so similar though. If this is a grey, it's a very light grey, I guess. What else in here? This is a very light brown for very how do you say it? Shade tint, and what's the other term for it from color theory? I don't remember now. It's like when you add gray to a color in color theory. If you add white, it's a tint. If you add black, it's a shade. In color theory, because you know, usually when you talk about shades of a color, it means something different. But in color theory, it means specifically when you add black. It's different because if you if you just talk about shades of black, it's gonna always be black. But you can say shades of black to somebody, and they're gonna understand that possibly that's like, oh, like a color that's very dark and similar to black, you know. Depends on the context. But anyway, yeah, I was trying to remember the word that when you add gray to a color, but whatever. My point is, this is I believe this is a very light shade of brown with a lot of gray added to it. Let's say, and different shades of it for the bottom parts of the wood, alongside shades of white for these parts here, these part beams. What else? Another shade of white or grey for the ground. I'm gonna call it a very greyish white, I guess. What else? Blue on many details. Again, the shades of orange. Again, light brown for the crates. Grey for this shutter door with some details in other colors. What else? I mentioned before, blue, a lot of blue for these barrels. Because there are many barrels, and there is this arrow sign. What else? I guess I mentioned before, but the sky has a purplish blue shade to it, I guess. I don't know. The control point, grey for the metal, and very light white for the hologram. At least this one right of the question mark. Then it becomes a red or blue hologram again, depending on who captured it. What else? I mentioned it before, but a lot of yellow for these barrels. What else? Another shade of brown here. Okay, so this is more of a grayish shade of brown. This is a more less grayish, let's say, a shade of brown. What else? Green for the holes, I guess. And I think that's mostly it. And here a lot of red on writing spawn on details like the computer, the workstations, and on these parts of the wall. Although you still see orange on the rocky parts and white or grey on the concrete. Yeah, it's kind of hard to make out if this is a grey or a shade of white, but whatever. They're not too far apart, right? Light, very light brown, I guess, for these crates. Some yellow, orange yellow for this machine here. And details in red, and I think that's it. So just to recap, a lot of orange, brown, grey / white. Grey and white, I guess. Grey and white. And red and blue on many details. Just the colors of the information on many details. Also I didn't mention the pickups, but grey and light brown again for this one. For the small ammo pack, I don't think I remember where there's a small ammo pack here. But that's the grey one, right? The medium half pack has like white and teal in it, and red. But yeah. Let's move on to the final element of art here for me to talk about, the element of value, which is about light and darkness, illumination and shadiness. You can kind of see it on stuff like this, right? You can kind of make out the shape of a shadow here. To the left is a bit darker, to the right is a bit brighter. So let's see. First things first, let's just get this out of the way. Even on this on the shadier part, you can make out very well the details of the textures, for example. So very mild shadows, and I believe that kind of repeats itself through most of the map. A bit in here it's a bit darker. That's interesting. Here is a bit. It's not that easy to see the details of the textures. So under the viaduct, especially on the very edge, on the very connections of it, it's a bit of a darker shadow. Interesting. And what else? And the brightness, I would say it's also in general mild. Nothing that's too shiny that gets hard to see. Mild brightness overall. Let me see if I can find an exception. And also the placement looks pretty random, honestly. It's like don't think they tried to go for anything specific. with the placement of light and shadows, with exception of the very dark ones under the viaduct. And what else? Yeah, the best that I think we can say is that on a number of shadows you can kind of make out the shapes of the buildings that are generating them. So you could say that there is the realism in the shadows in here. You see the boxes are casting this shadow, and we can kind of make that out without too much trouble. Same here. So yeah, I just want to see my spawn if I see any like very intense shininess. After the brightness is just gonna be mild in general. So here, this is a bit brighter, but I don't know. It's not that much, I would say. It doesn't hurt your eyes. Stuff like looking directly at the light. I guess these are sources of very intense shininess. So yeah, okay. Directly at the light sources, there is intense brightness. Okay, there is some. And very shiny. And yeah, so intense shininess at the light bulbs, light sources, intense darkness under the viaduct, in general following the geometry and conveying that. So yeah. So that's it for the analysis. Let's move on to the interpretation. So first things first, let's begin with the obvious. This is a map 1442. That must be a part of the interpretation, kinda, otherwise a bit irresponsible on our part. Oh well, okay, maybe not. Maybe we could, maybe. Especially if we knew the story, the history of this map. What if it was an accident? What if it was designed for another game and ended up in Team Fortress 2 because of reasons? But in this case, I never heard of anything like that, and there's a lot of other things I think about considering the game design that makes me believe that this map was when looking at the stuff from the description analysis. Look at that stuff, make me believe this is a map designed for Team Fortress 2. And we see, with all the rest that we already know, I still think this is a very solid interpretation. And so, yeah. It's more like, if this was some sort of exception, there was a story behind it, we should consider that. But let's just say, it's in the game, so I think that's a reasonable argument to say this was intended as a map for Team Fortress 2. Okay, King of the Hill map. What else? So considering stuff like the name and all the colors and textures, the shades of orange and the sand-like textures, layered textures for this kind of sedimentary rocks apparently to me. Stuff like that make me believe that the idea of conveying that you're in a desert was important, you know, Badlands or some sort of wasteland, some location without much vegetation or civilization, stuff like that. So I'm gonna call it a desert. So koth map 1442, the idea that you're in a desert. What else? I believe also the middle part of it, the viaduct bridge thing with the carts and the crates, that to me seemed very important for the creator's vision because of things like the placement of the control point, and there is all these details of it, the use of color and stuff like that. Kind of tells a story to me. And so much so that I believe that was an important part of the creative vision here. For there to be, so specifically, if I'm gonna put it into words, for this to be a train track to be in the middle of the pathway of a train. So I see that as important for the creative vision in this viaduct thing. What else? Desert, terrain, koth map for TF2. Anything else? There's the red versus blue, but I don't know. I think that those are already solid ideas for the visual. Just wonder if I would like to add anything else here. Is this enough? If I was like the developer, I went like, oh, I want to make a koth map for TF2, which is like in a desert, and there is a train track related to it. Would that be enough here for things in general? I think so. On a number of maps I consider the buildings as an important part of the creative vision, but on this one I don't think they are that prevalent, let's say. They're there, but compared to some other maps, they don't call my attention too much, let's say, at least in comparison to other stuff like the fact that we're in a desert or the viaduct with the train tracks going over it. Stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll stick to just these three ideas. So, koth map for TF2, a desert, and there is some train tracks thing, stuff like that. Yeah, so that's gonna be my interpretation for the visual. So now let's go for the judgment step. Now I'm gonna take a look into the principles of art. For this critique I'm gonna consider 6 of them. Movement, unity, contrast, emphasis, balance and proportion. And I'll talk a little bit about each of them. And see how well do the principles help convey the vision, how well they are aligned with the vision. Because the principles at the end of the day are refer to how the author chose to use the elements. So that's the idea. We're gonna compare what the author did with what the author envisioned, stuff like that. So let's begin with the principle of movement, which, by the way, as I always remind you guys, does not relate to animations. It's more about how something in art can move your eyes in some sort of path direction. Arrow sign is an example of it. It kinda moves your eyes into the direction it's pointing. I still don't know if that's psychological, cultural, or whatever, but that's the idea here. And there are many other ways to accomplish it. So for the principle of movement here, let's see. This bridge, for example, I think there is a little bit of it, to the extent of it and the placement of it. The arrow signs, naturally, I just mentioned them. What else? The bridge could be, the viaduct could be a little bit like that, but it's so wide that I don't know if it's helping me. Maybe, I guess maybe a bit. So it would be the bridge, the viaduct. Especially on these parts, because of stuff like the textures and color, which like keeps going in a pattern. I think that helps convey the principle of movement. Also the train tracks, I suppose. But the train tracks is a bit harder to see because of the carts. So yeah, but it's still, I would say there is movement here visually. What else? The way the wood here, the shapes and the colors, even a little bit the value maybe. No, I don't think I see much value, but definitely the colors, the shapes, and somewhat the texture help convey a bit the idea of horizontal movement to me. The effect of horizontal movement. Here these tracks on the ground definitely kind of guide my eyes to follow them. follow me to go left. You know the map's right, but still, it's there. It's to the right, the map. What else? Some of these wooden beams, I guess, also convey to me a little bit of movement. But maybe I'm just maybe I'm starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel of those. I'm just gonna see on the spot if there's anything that I would say is the principle of movement. I guess the texture a bit here of the sedimented part. But yeah, I guess that's good enough. So with all that said, through all of that, through all of those examples, the bridges, the viaduct, the wooden beams, the what else? The sedimented, layered parts of the wall. Does any of that help convey the idea that this is a koth map for Team Fortress 2? For the principle of movement, I think not. Also there is this. Oh, okay. There is something here. There is a bit of game design here, right? Because the way this is, there is the I see the movement here and guiding us in a direction that, and also with this part here, they are kind of guiding our eyes to where the control point is, for this game mode, where you need to be to get to win the game. So it is tied to the game design of Team Fortress 2 in that sense. These two parts specifically, I would say. So I suppose that is helping with the vision in that sense. What else? Obviously, we should think about the fact that the control point is in the middle of the bridge, the viaduct itself. I guess that also matters, because if our eyes are being guided forward, eventually we end up in the control point. Even if we pass through it, maybe we will still reach that. So I guess it's helping in all those parts in general, as tying to the design of Team Fortress 2 for King of the Hill map. In other words, if there was a payload at the back, this maybe wouldn't be helping too much, but for King of the Hill map, with the control point being here, you know. Anyway, what about the idea of a desert? For movement, the closest I can think of is the horizontal layered textures on the walls. But I don't think that's like exclusive to deserts. I don't think that alone communicates that we're in a desert. You know? We could be on other biomes with that kind of rock, let's say. So just that, through the principle of movement, I don't see helping. And finally, what about the train tracks, the idea of there being a train going through here? Oh well, I do see a little bit on the train tracks. A little bit. Just because of how long and continuous it is, you know? I think it's helping conveying that. So now let's move on to the principle of unity/variety. Unity and variety, which are like opposites, but we kind of talk about them at the same time. So unity is all about like different parts of the artwork apparently working together. You can accomplish that through continuity, proximity, repetition, patterns, many ways. And variety is kind of the opposite. You know, how if there is something unique and different there, how many of those kind of things are on the map. That also adds variety. For example, this hologram here, there's only this on the whole map, so this is a source of variety. But at the same time, when you're talking about unity, we could say there is repetition, and repetition of the shades of orange from the ground to the rocks. And there's continuity on these shades, like going and going and going and going and going, you know. There doesn't seem to be a separation between that kind of stuff, even on the rocks themselves. Although I don't see continuity between the ground and the rocks, but there's proximity also at the same time. There's repetition of the color and proximity, both because they could be like similar colors but on different points, similar colors on different points. But in this case there are similar colors and in proximity to each other, and each one has some continuity, some very respectable continuity, I would say, to their colors there. What else? What I said for movement also has a little bit of that, you know. Also because there is, as I mentioned in my own words, continuity on the train tracks, and basically that. You could even talk about the patterns of the planks underneath the tracks themselves, you know. There's a pattern there, repeating itself. Anything else for unity or variety that I find important? Also there's, for example, repetition on the shapes and forms of the buildings. Even though they have different colors and textures, their shapes and forms are pretty much the same. Trapezoidal, rectangles, rectangular shapes, and prismatic and blocky forms. Even on the map itself, like the whole geometry of the map is symmetrical, right? So that's a strong unity there, strong source of unity. All the symmetry routine is a very strong unity. And what else? And yeah, so a lot of stuff. First things first, does any of that tie to the idea of a koth map for Team Fortress 2? Well, for one, symmetry on the map very strongly tied to koth map, because I believe all koth maps are symmetrical in one way or another. The point of symmetry sometimes changes, I believe, because for example in here the control point is between the two teams, but on koth Brazil, for example, the control point is not between the two teams, it's on some other point, but there is a bilateral symmetry. I believe there is always bilateral symmetry on all koth maps. Depending on the map changes where the axis should be, but in any case. So very strongly does the unity there, communicating a very unique property of koth maps for TF2. Payload maps usually are not symmetrical, for example. Some are, have a degree of symmetry. Thunder Mountain, the last stage, has a lot of symmetry, for example. But that's pretty common for, I don't know if all King of the Hill maps, but definitely most of them have a very strong, have a lot of symmetry. They're not perfectly symmetrical. Even on the game design, not just visually, even on the game design, the Sawmill has differences on the geography, not just visually, but in any case. And also, as I said, variety. There is the hologram in the middle of the map. The hologram being the only thing on the whole map, and on koth, on King of the Hill game modes, there being only one control point, one hill, let's say, with the holograms, so visually it's well communicated. If there was multiple holograms throughout the map, it would be weird, you know, so through the variety I see that helping the creative vision that I interpreted. What about the idea of a desert? This one is just because of what I was talking about previously. One of a very defining feature of this map, I would say, just how much unity there is on this color texture of the ground and the rocks. And yeah, it fits well with the idea of a desert, because those are colors of the geography of a desert. I would say the rocks and the ground, the sand. Not all deserts, but some kinds of deserts. And the sedimentary rocks, again, they're present in some deserts, although I don't think in all of them. But with the unity of color and textures, and I guess forms also, and shapes, all of that I think convey very well and very easily that this is a desert. And finally, what about the idea of a train track for unity / variance? difference. Oh, I did mention there's continuity here on the train tracks, so yeah, that easily conveys a train, helps convey the train. This is the pathway of a train line. By the way, don't be surprised if different principles of art often like help each other, influence each other. Something goes for more than one principle. But yeah, but that's it for Unity/Variety. Let's talk about the principle of contrast. What about the differences of parts of the artwork? So for contrast, for example, you could say there is some degree of contrast between the blue of the sky and the orange of the ground. Although that gets a little bit harder to notice. Here I think one of the easier, okay, here is I think one of the easier ways to see it. There's some contrast there. You could say even there is also some contrast here between the orange of the ground and the brown and grey of the buildings. What else? Here, let me go over here real quick. Okay. Here there is a lot of contrast through their shapes and forms between the viaduct and the valley and the ground around it and the rocks. The color, I was going to say the color, but I guess even on this angle, which is kind of like a very good angle for that, I don't see that the colors being that well contrasted because of the effect of value. Which there is many points of contrast between light and darkness, right? But since they're all like randomly spread out, it's kind of a lesser contrast, I would say, compared to other assemblages of elements, let's say. But even stuff like the green of the vegetation contrast with the I forgot to mention the green when I was talking about colors. But this very like grayish green of the vegetation, and also their shapes and forms have a contrast with the ground, the colors and textures of the ground. Anyway, so yeah, those are examples of contrast. And I guess I should address this. What about red versus blue? Shouldn't there be some contrast there? And it's kinda hard because they're so far apart. We would some maps it's easier to see contrast between red and blue, you know, the whole point of the game. Some are harder. King of the Hill is one of the easier maps to see that, easier game modes to see that kind of stuff, but even then I don't think it's always easy to see it. An example of a map where it's kind of easy is Lazarus, because depending on where you stand, if you stand like at the bottom of the staircase, then to your left there is one of the teams, then to the right there is the other, and the colors are very easily conveyed. On Badlands, the angles of vision do not make it that easy to see both at the same time for contrast. They're kind of far apart from each other, you know, so you kind of need some proximity to have contrast, ideally, or to make it stronger. I guess, like, we could contrast it also, but it's harder to see because of the presentation here. Basically, like stuff like this. Now we can kind of see a little bit, you know, because there is the blue on a corner of this shot, let's say, and there is the red logo on another corner. But it's kind of, you know, minor in the great scheme of things. On the rest of the stuff that's being showcased, way easier to see. For example, is contrast between the color of the sky and a lot of the orange on the ground. Stuff like that, or the repetition of the forms and shapes of the buildings before we're talking about another principle. In any case, so all the stuff that I said for contrast, does any of that help convey that this is a koth map 1442? So let's see here. Well, this is like a minor contrast, but there is this stark yellow on the ground that's used, and the yellow of the hologram. That has some contrast. It's not as strong to me as the other stuff that I said, but it's there, and I don't think I should ignore it. And perhaps more importantly, the textures of the hologram, which is kind of a the hologram texture, you know, that has a contrast with the rest of the more solid things on the rest of the map surface. So that's a source of contrast, which is very easily tied to the game mechanics and the game rules of koth 1442, right? The control point. This is the control point. There is this thing, even between the yellow and the black stripes, there is a degree of contrast there, I suppose, you know. So yeah, it's present. Could be a starker contrast, let's say, but there is some there. So yeah, helping the vision. What about the idea of the desert? Now I think it's the contrast is of what I said before, of the orange of the ground and the blue of the sky, purplish blue of the sky. Now I think it's easier because half of the contrast is something typical of deserts, of some deserts, the orange, and even the sky to be with few clouds. So, because if there was a lot of clouds, there would be a lot of white, right? But since there is basically none, so I think that also helps with deserts, because I think deserts should have less humidity, right? And maybe that means they have less clouds, because clouds are formations of water in the sky. I think. I don't know. I would have to study a little bit to confirm that part, but I think just half of it, you know, the contrast helping, a part of the contrast being the color of the ground, the orange, I think that's enough to help convey it's a desert, even if the cloud part got it wrong somewhere. And finally, what about the idea of a train and the train tracks, train line and stuff? For contrast, again, technically there is some between the shapes and farms, because there is a train line here, right? Train tracks, and there is some contrast between the colors and the colors not so much, but there is some between the farms and shapes that allows us in the first place to realize that there is a train track here. So, which again, not that strong to me in comparison to the other contrasts, but it's there. I think it's perceptible enough for me to consider that it's helping with the vision. Okay, so yeah. Now let's move on to the principle of emphasis or hierarchy. I consider both principles to be kind of the same. Some authors consider hierarchy to be a separate principle, but anyway. So, emphasis, which is all about like keeping there being some sort of focal point in the picture, some point with visual dominance. If you say hierarchy, then there could be like multiple, and then there is one stronger one, then a smaller one, then a smaller one. So for emphasis / hierarchy, let's see here. For example, here there is some degree of emphasis of the blue in the middle of everything. There is some contrast there that I think is helping convey that. Contrasting colors, shapes, textures, for example. But let's see if we can find something with a stronger emphasis, at least to me. Also, double sign. We already gone through the principle of movement, but another example here. So we have one sign and another sign, so it takes our eyes in some direction. But anyway, emphasis. Let's see. Yeah, I think I probably already know what I'm going to say. But yeah, often to me it's gonna either be the blue and or red signs and details, stuff like, I don't know, stuff like this. it has a very stark contrast, as I said, both in color and texture, and when it's an arrow sign, also shapes. And not sure if you should consider the letters or shapes. I wonder if you should have considered the letters or as lines now. Interesting, but I'm not gonna retcon that, even if so. In any case, yeah, if either is the blue and the red details, also red, for example, that arrow sign there, to me they haven't a degree of emphasis, and in here the hologram again, it's helping a lot with emphasis to me. Also the placement of it, because the map is symmetrical, so that's how Unity is kind of helping with the emphasis to me. Since the map is symmetrical and there is this thing in the middle of the map, there's some emphasis being brought to here. Technically, like this whole axis in the middle of the map, by virtue of the principle of Unity, has some degree of emphasis to it. And the control point is there, and the hologram is there. And so that's where I see emphasis / hierarchy very strongly in the middle point, and as I said, through color, through texture, with help from the principle of Unity, and stuff like that. And here through color, texture with the outside. Anyway, so, and with all that said, does any of that help with the idea of a koth map for Team Fortress 2? Yeah, obviously, because the stuff are always in red and blue, so those are the colors of the teams, very easily tied to the game design there. Also, a number of the signs and stuff are giving us information meaningful for the game, you know, where to go, where's the battlements, where's the exit, where's the control point, stuff like that. And there's the control point itself, which is again, the middle of the map, classic koth stuff, classic koth design. And so yeah, with all that said, what about the idea that this is some sort of desert? What about the emphasis helping convey this is a desert? Or something like that. For emphasis, I don't see it helping. At most, there is, as I said, on this whole middle axis, on the symmetry of the map, I think that there is some emphasis here. But the ground of the desert and the rocks go on the far distance, and the ground they just go everywhere, so I don't see the emphasis helping, you know, with conveying that this is a desert because of that. And the other stuff, it doesn't have anything to do with deserts, right? Like signs and control points and stuff. I don't know. Okay. So what about the idea of a train track stuff, train line for emphasis? For emphasis, I don't think it's helping too much. Okay, to be fair, the train tracks do go through the middle of the map. It's literally under the control point. So there's a little bit of a... no, and also, okay, not only that, I suppose, like, one of the elements of the map that brings the symmetry are the train cards, which are, you know, what's making the emphasis, I guess. What's helping for the emphasis. So, well, does that make sense? I don't know. Maybe that part not, because then we would say stuff like, oh, there's also symmetry between the holes. Does that mean that we are on a garden or something? No, because even though it's helping create the emphasis, it's not the emphasis itself, I think. So anyway, but for emphasis, but I still think it's close enough to the control point, to this source of emphasis / hierarchy. If it's a hierarchy, this would be the point with the greatest visual focus to me, and the signs would be below that on the hierarchy, and the rest would be below those. But anyway, to me, both the train cards and the train tracks are so close to the point of emphasis that I think it's kind of hard not to notice them. So I see the emphasis here also helping with the idea of conveying that there is a train line here. Okay, let's move on now to the principle of balance, which is all about the states of equilibrium or tension, and how even or uneven that is. Does it look stable, or does it look like expanding? Does it look, if there is tension, does it look like it's going to break? Stuff like that. Tension, if there is tension or not, you know? So balance is usually a principle that a lot of people depends a lot on the artist, but a lot of people like to do visually balanced stuff. So I don't know, let's see if I can find anything here. Stuff like all these haphazard placed plates, metal plates, I think are actually a source of variety. But they kind of look stable, right? Doesn't look like they're falling, doesn't look like they are forcing something on the structure, everything. And in general, that's kind of the rule here. In general, things look like they are solid, that they are stable. Nothing seems like it's breaking or being tension to me. Even on parts that are supporting the weight here, it seems everything's pretty balanced to me. Visually, I'm not talking about snipers or anything. So yeah, I think in general everything's balanced. What we could do at best is look for small things that could shift the center of mass of objects, let's say. Stuff like this here, but it's just such a minimal change, you know. It's kind of pointless, I would say. Not always, but in this case, some works of art, for some works of art that matters a lot, I would say, shifting the center of mass. Maybe, I think. Depends on how well they convey balance or imbalance, I guess. But yeah, with all that said, so mostly balanced here in general. And as I said, there are like minimal points with some shift on the center of mass. That's it. Does any of that help convey that this is a koth map for TF2? Don't think so. Of the clues that this is 1442, do you see any of those being about some state of tension or equilibrium or lack of those? Right? Nah, just like the map in general is balanced. This rock is balanced, you know, and it's not in the control point. It's stable, doesn't look like it's falling or breaking or anything. And so on so forth. So since it's everywhere, it's basically nowhere. Or something like that. So yeah, not helping with that side of the visual. What about the idea that this is a desert? Is the balance helping with that? Also not. Like, you know, if you're thinking about deserts, is balanced, is equilibrium the first thing that comes to your mind or something, you know? At least not to me, at least I don't see that as a defining trait of a desert for us to use to communicate, you know, ideas. So yeah, some deserts could have like pending rocks about to fall, some don't. I don't know. In here I don't see anything like that. Everything's visually balanced. And finally, what about the train tracks? And again, don't see that helping exactly, because it's a bit too broad. The important part were there, if there was some sources of tension or lack of equilibrium, where those would be. So that would be the important question. But since it's everywhere, there's nothing nowhere again. Unless it's something very specific, like I don't know, if you want to portray justice, perhaps, you know, if it's literally the lady holding the scales. So maybe then it's a way that you can portray that idea. But just for trains, I don't know, whatever. Okay, so finally let's move on to the last principle of art here for this critique, the principle of proportion. Proportion is all about the sizes of different things, parts of the artwork, and also if there is some sort of notable dimension for any of those. That kind of stuff is important. That's what proportion is about. So one thing that I like, that I think helps a bit to look at the proportions of an artwork, is to try to group things into scale, roughly. We don't need to be too precise, we don't need to measure it, but just to have a rough idea of things. So for example, like I would say this set of computers have a bigger scale than this locker, etc, etc. But let's see, for this, but I don't want to focus too much on the details. If I'm going to group things here scale-wise, I would say, for example, this mega structure here on the rock is something for on one scale, and perhaps I would consider it on the same scale as the buildings, kind of like on the bigger scale of things. Smaller than that, I would say like rocks, like these ones behind the fences. What else? And also maybe the train carts with all the barrels. I guess I would roughly group them on a roughly similar scale. What else? Perhaps on a smaller one, these carts with less stuff on them and then are not connected. I'm kind of considering the connected carts of this one. These ones are separated. So we have these carts and these smaller rocks on a smaller scale thus. And perhaps I would group the sport parts of the viaduct also. What else? And after that, maybe I would start going into the details. The barrels, the crates, what else? Barrel crates, the planks, the set of planks, tires. And smaller than that, finally the pickups, I guess. The pickups and the hose, some smaller details, this like tap. There are some maps with sometimes this thing here, for example. There are some maps with like some shovels on the wall or pickaxes. I would group those with the pickups, I would say. Just one way to do it. And if we're gonna look for the notable, something with notable dimensions here, first to look at it. When I say notable dimensions, is something like, imagine payload maps, which technically the payload's rail goes through the whole map, but at the same time it's just a rail, so it's kind of very thin, but you know it's very long, so that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for here, for example. Notable dimensions. There are those rocks in the background look very big, but maybe I would consider them as big as the structures here. And I'm kind of grouping the structures together, right? Because like this house here alone, if you like separated here at this part, I think it's way smaller than the rocks in the background. But if I'm gonna group it as the set of buildings together, then to me they are roughly similar in size. What else? I'm not sure I see any notable dimension here. I think the most that I could see is the viaduct itself, which is very flat and long. Yeah, sure. No, it's very flat and long, and I'm not sure it's fair to just say it's as big as the houses or smaller or bigger than the, I don't know. I think we need to look at specific properties of it. So with all that said, does any of that grouping stuff and viaducting, does any of that help convey that this is a map for Team Fortress 2? So we kind of grouped like bigger rocks with the buildings and the base where the spawn is. So that's all together, I guess. Then we group the bigger rocks with the base and the set of buildings. After that, I grouped the like these medium-sized rocks and the train carts. After that, I grouped the smaller carts and the smaller rocks. And after that, the details, the boxes, the barrels, separated ones, I guess. And after that, the pickups and smaller details. So, and finally, there is the viaduct itself. Yeah, like none of that I think helps. Because the problem is whenever there is something that kind of could tie to the game design of Team Fortress 2, koth, etc, etc, it's kind of muddled up with other stuff, you know. Because I think that if you have some sort of unified concept on a scale, I think that helps convey the vision. But for example, the base where there is the spawn, which is a game mechanic for Team Fortress 2, there is always a spawn room. So the base I see it having a similar size to the buildings and the bigger rocks on the background, so you know it's all kind of muddled up. Then we have stuff like the train carts, the bigger ones, but also with a similar size to the rocks. Okay, the carts and I mean, maybe you already know what I'm going to say later, but the carts and the bigger rocks that are not tied to Team Fortress 2 as I see it. Neither there's smaller rocks and there's smaller carts, and neither barrels and crates. And finally there's the pickups, but to me they kind of have a similar size somewhat to the smaller details. As I said, the hose, this little tap here, you can say like this drain for example, some smaller ones. So yeah, so by their proportions I don't see helping convey that this is a koth map for TF2. And neither the viaducting, because you know, whatever, it's just a viaduct, just a bridge. Koth needs like a point, but for the dimensions we're looking at something long and flat, and so you know that doesn't exactly tie. Not to say that you, guess what, could place a control point in the middle of it, but that's more about unity or contrast or emphasis. You know, the placement usually is about one of those other principles, which we already covered. So for the proportions, I don't see helping to say that this is a koth map for TF2. What about the idea of a desert? And again, I don't see anything. There was like the rocks, and but again, as I said before, I don't think that's enough to say this is a desert. And even the bigger, all rocks, the bigger ones, the medium ones, and the smaller ones. None of that, and they're even muddled up with other stuff, right? They're all muddled up with something. It's either with train carts or buildings and stuff, so you know, for the proportions I don't see any of that helping. And naturally some sort of viaduct, wooden bridge thing, also not something of deserts, let's say, necessarily. And finally, what about the idea that communicating that there's a train here, this is a train line or something. Again, for the proportions muddled up, because what did we say, how did we talk about that have anything to do with trains in the first place? So we mentioned the bigger carts, train carts, but that's kind of has a muddled up size and proportion to these medium sized rocks. And rocks, you know, rocks and trains are not the same thing, I would say. Fun enough, if there was something specific about the train cart, I don't know if this was a Flintstones mod, whatever, for Team Fortress 2, maybe that could help, but I don't know. And also this isolated carts and the smaller rocks, I wonder if I did a good job grouping those, because I don't know, whatever. It was just a broad stroke attempt. In any case, again, I don't see them tying too well together. They're kind of muddled up, rocks and cards and stuff. Like, if we're gonna be a little bit more rigorous, if we're gonna really look for things with a very similar size to the isolated cards, maybe we are not gonna find any, and then we could say something here for the cards helping, but I'm not sure. It's kind of weird, right, to group it, because they have like different forms and shapes in the first place, so that's why it's kind of hard sometimes to do this grouping idea. That's why I try to not to be too minute with it. But in any case, I don't know. If this train cart is not on the same scale as the smaller rocks, I would probably still like group it with these other rocks, honestly. Maybe. I don't know, it's rough. They're not too far, but maybe they're far enough. It's very hard right now as I see it. I don't know. I don't know. Now that I look at it, maybe I would like add one more scale, just to say like, so the cart here has its unique scale, and smaller than that we have these rocks, and smaller than that we have the crates and stuff. Maybe that makes more sense now that I look at it. I guess I just glimpsed over it, let's say, and didn't stop to measure in my head the dimensions, the proportions, I don't know. But anyway, that doesn't change anything for the other ideas of the visual, but if we consider that this isolated cart has some very unique dimensions for the whole map, I think that helps a bit convey to us that this is a train cart, we're in a train line or something, you know, because of the carts. So yeah, I think that's, to me that sounds a bit more fair, a bit fairer, a bit better. Yeah, and finally the viaduct itself, the bridge itself, I don't see helping with the idea of trains whatsoever, but that's okay, because we already have this, right? So, okay, that was it. And so, finally I can pass Judgement, and from everything, at least one idea of the creative vision was conveyed, was tied to at least one of the each principles, so each one of the ideas, all of the ideas for the vision were conveyed in some way. So the conclusion, my conclusion is that this is a successful work of art. As always, congratulations creators of the map, of the art, congratulations designers of Koth, King of the Hill, at least for my interpretation, you achieved your goal. Visually speaking, right, art-wise, as I said at the beginning of this critique, the game design of it's another matter altogether. Is this a map that's balanced for the game design, you know? Is this a map that's fun for the game design? That's another subject altogether. But, you know, the art, I would say, fits the bill here. Does what it was intended to, as I interpret it. So yeah, that was it for the critique. Hope you enjoyed it. Join me for the next critique. Bye YouTube.